So I'm playing this game called Rooftops and Alleys. It came out like yesterday as of recording this. And if you like Skate or the Tony Hawk games, and you like parkour, it's a lot like those. It's more like Tony Hawk in that a lot of the tricks are button combos or a button. There's a lot like Skate where, let's say I do a flip here and I don't have enough space, I still bail. I still gotta figure out when and how to do things correctly in order for the game to let me do them. Like, yeah, don't do that, obviously. So if you want to do something cool, you gotta figure out when and where you can do it. There's also a session marker system, much like Skate, where you can set it somewhere and then be there again. Which is also really cool for if you're trying to set up a line. So this is a really neat parkour game, and I'd recommend it to anybody, like I said, who enjoyed Skate or Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, because it's kind of like a mixture between those two games for parkour. I've actually had a very long history with parkour games in the past. See, originally, first parkour game that I've ever played is called Mirror's Edge, and I don't know how many people know about it, but it was really cool because its movement system allowed you to get places really quickly, but to do that, you had to exert a lot of skill, and you had to figure out, you know, is the main path like really the best one here? And so over time, you could play the game much faster and better if you just figured out, alright, I should go there instead, and, you know, it may be a more complicated route, and it may be more, like, intensive on you as a player, but hey, it's a lot faster, and if you actually pull it off, you can get it done, like, really nicely, and it'll look real nice. And so that's what really got me hooked on, like, parkour type games, because even though it was, like, really hard at first, it just felt really good to get good at movement. And I've always really liked games with like very complex movement. Oddly enough, ironically, Mario 64 is a good example of that, because even though Mario 64 is not like parkour centric, Mario does have some parkour moves, and that movement system is definitely one of the better ones. And that's one that I've been very interested in ever, like, even before Mirror's Edge. Because good movement feels really good when you can pull it off. But, I mean, part of that is also, like, it has to be somewhat skill-based, because otherwise it doesn't ever feel good to pull anything off. Like, right now you can see that I'm doing flips, and, like, yeah, I'm just pressing one button to do them, but it's still kind of, there's a lot of skill in, like, alright, okay, which flip do I do now, though? What kind of variety do I want to put into my movement? What kind of flip can I get away with at this height? You know, how much do I have to charge my grounded jump in order to accomplish that? You know, and like, I also have to think about, alright, routing. Where am I going? Where can I move without, you know, destroying my legs? And so, I've always found that kind of game kind of fascinating. Especially one of these games where, like, you can kind of just chill out and move around. It's a very calming experience to just kind of move for a while. So I've always considered this kind of like a very good game loop. And so I've played Mirror's Edge many times. I can't tell you the amount of times I've beaten the campaign. I have over 100 hours in the game, and it takes like maybe 10 to beat it if you're really bad. So obviously I play that game a little bit too much, and I've been kind of waiting for more parkour games to come along. I played a few games on Roblox, actually, called Parkour and eventually Parkour Reborn, that kind of fit that same role that Mirror's Edge did, of, like, movement that's, like, skill-based and really fast if you can get good at it. And Parkour was kind of not, like, the ideal game, because in that game there was a lot of twitchy movement. So you'd go up to a wall, and if you wanted to scale it, instead of doing, like, a realistic wall climb like this, what you do is, you go up to it and you'd hit space to jump, turn fast, and then hit space again. And that was kind of an issue because the amount of milliseconds that it took you to do that determined how high you went. And that was fun, but not really what I was looking for, because it became more of a mashing game than a parkour game, because a lot of the movements were based on like really strict timing, and it's like it was fun, just not really for the same reasons, and it didn't really fill that itch of like getting a really good parkour game. And so Parkour Reborn filled that a lot better because it was a lot of the movements less based on twitchiness, but it's still very unrealistic movement. But it had a lot of good mechanics like chaining long jumps on ledges that may not have been realistic, but it did give you a lot of speed for skill, and it was really fun. And ultimately, speed and fun should be the main goals of these games. You know, like Reggie Fils-Aimé said like when he was Nintendo president, if it ain't fun, why bother? It's kind of what the motto of what most games should probably follow, unless it's like, you know, a rage game like Getting Over It or something where it's purposefully screwing the player over. But this game's quite unique from anything I've played before because this is more about, you know, the style of where you're going, and you know, it's not always about going fast. Going fast is still like important. There's time trials, but there's a little bit more to it than that. You can choose like, you know, how stylistic you want to be with it, and it's a lot more realistic of a movement system than a lot of the other games I've played. Like yeah, like there's no. It's not like preset animations, and that's like it. There's like skill involved in, you know, how you string them together and where you can do them. And like if you're high enough up, you need a roll. And there's also like small things and quirks, like for example, when you do a vault, you need time to land, but you can kind of mitigate that time if you roll instead. So like as an example, if I do this, you can see how I like land and then get up, but if I roll out of it instead, I kind of keep my momentum going a little bit better. And it also just looks better, especially if I do like a double Arabian, like I just failed there. If I do a double Arabian like this, it looks much better if I roll out of it because it's like a triple roll kind of deal. But you know, I don't have to. I could do like a double Arabian back into another cartwheel and just have that be my movement. So, you know, there's a lot of stylistic options with this game. And this game also helps fill that like parkour itch, just kind of in a different way, because although the movement's pretty good, it's not so much complex in where you go, but rather what you do. Not to say that there's no complexity, because what I did just then was use a wall to get up to a place I wouldn't have otherwise been able to reach. But it's not like, it doesn't feel like it's the main focus of the game necessarily. And what? Wow, I just made it out of bounds. Well, yeah, I got sandwiched between out of bounds areas. That's kind of funny. If I knew the cause of that, I'd report it to the developer, but I have no clue how that happened. Well, that's kind of cool. So, movement games have always been kind of fascinating to me. And they've always kind of like had that kind of itch of like, I can just kind of chill out and, you know, move around, make my own kind of style, make my own way of moving around the map, figure out where I want to go. Controller issues. I don't know what the problem is here. That's annoying. And I've actually always wanted to make a game like this. I've had various ideas. I still might, because although this game exists now, I still have a lot of different ideas of how it would work. Some are more similar to Mirror's Edge, some are more similar to this. I really like that precision land move, because you can kind of just stop on a place, and like that's something that real tracers do, because it is genuinely useful to be able to just kind of land on a ledge. But so that might be something I might take inspiration from, but what I kind of want to make is more about the speed of where you go and, you know, options. And so, game design has always been something I've kind of wanted to go into. I've just kind of realized that I'm not like the most creative person when it comes to that. So like I know various design things, like yeah, like when I'm playing a game, like yeah, maybe they probably should have designed that differently, or you know, the game would probably be better if it was designed like this. But it's very hard to make like a game from the ground up. I have a few ideas, but it's a lot harder than you'd think. At least for me, it is. So what I've really gone into is game programming, and programming movement systems like this to work as well as this one does. Quite difficult, so I commend the developer of this game for doing that. It feels really good to control, even in the early access state it is right now. Surprisingly few glitches, and it's very intuitive to figure out how to do things. My only complaint is that there's a sprint button, so if I'm not holding the sprint button, I just kind of walk around like this, like kind of like a dummy. And there's no real reason not to hold sprint for pretty much your entire time playing the game. So I kind of wish there was an option to like sprint only, or like walk on press of RT. Because right now my index finger is getting pretty sore, and you know, there's like no reason I shouldn't be. But other than that, this game feels really nice doing stuff. Like, if I bail most of the time, it's my fault, because I couldn't decide what move to do in time, or I just screwed up the inputs. There is some consistency in, like, what buttons do what. Like, the top 3 face buttons generally do flips and stuff. You know, the B button is usually for rolling, like if you do a dive, or if you are already in the air and you want to roll. Like that. You can also hit X and then B, and then it will do this kind of dive roll. It's kind of neat. One of the design choices I really like about this game is the speed boost. So you build up meter by doing tricks and stuff, and then you get this little speed boost. And the reason I think this is really well designed is because there's time trials. And in the time trials, doing tricks is usually just slower. But the speed boost gives you a reason to care about doing tricks, because then you can build that meter and abuse the hell out of the speed boost meter. And that has gotten me way more golds than I probably deserve. But I think it's well designed. It gives you a reason to try and pick more stylish ways of going places. And it also gets you strategizing about, like, okay, so chaining this is pretty slow, but if I just do a double Arabian and then roll out of it, it actually doesn't stop my momentum that much while also still building a lot of meter. So you get, like, strategies like that. You also are incentivized to stop, like, grabbing ledges like that and more so grab ledges like this, which will make your runs look a lot more stylish, and, you know, there's a lot of skill as a player to be able to press the buttons at the correct time in order to not bail, because even though bailing doesn't, you know, stop the time trial, it's still a lot slower than if you had just done it correctly. So I think that's pretty well designed. But that's just my personal, like, relationship to parkour games. As I was saying earlier, is like I've loved movement in games for a long time. Has been like a really good mechanic to get me really involved. And you know you have a good system like this when somebody can just run around like this, not doing anything in specific, and just have a good time. That's how you know that, like, where you're going with your movement system is definitely the right direction. So if you ever wanted to build a movement game, you can use that as a good metric. Like, do you hit, like, test on your game to check for bugs and find yourself, like, doing it for way longer than you need to, then yeah, you've got a really good movement system then. Of course, not every game has to have, like, a really good movement system. There are games that aren't built around that sort of thing. And, you know, it doesn't always have to be parkour or, like, triple jumps or like, flips or anything like that, like Mario style. Good example is, like, Splatoon has a really good movement system. Now, it's not one of those movement systems that you could just, you know, run around on your own and have a lot of fun with. because it's not really the point of the game. But it's got a really good movement system for what it has, because it's a third-person shooter, and you've got to make critical choices on your routing and, you know, your movement options and why you do a certain movement option when you do it. And, you know, you got to paint the floor, and doing that kind of incentivizes you to shoot at something that isn't your enemy, and it takes territory control a lot more literally than most shooter games do. So that's pretty well designed in my opinion as well, but that serves a different purpose. Like, the movement system isn't like so good that you would just kind of do it on your own, but kind of, if it was, it would kind of take a lot of focus away from the shooting mechanics, and you'd have to dumb those down to get players at a reasonable like skill level to actually fight each other. And at that point, it would be taking away from like the main point of the game, which is that it's a shooter with, like, you know, a multiplayer PvP objective. So, you know, not every movement system has to be good in the sense that it's always fun to move around with. It can just be good in the way that it serves the main point of the game. But games like these that really focus on movement can be really satisfying. The other thing is you got to balance like how much forgiveness you give to the player with how much you want the movement system to be precise. Because a movement system that's overly forgiving can get really boring because failing is just impossible. But it could also get really frustrating if your game's not meant to be a rage game, but then suddenly the player is not being permitted to like actually accomplish anything. That can make a lot of players leave your game because they're just simply not having fun, and they were advertised fun. A movement system like Getting Over it's kind of the exception to that because, you know, the whole game's like brand is around being frustrating, and so I guess the main like point of that is so that the viewers get more of the fun because they get to watch somebody fail, and you kind of get that sense of accomplishment when you actually do make it to the top of the mountain. Whoops, press the wrong button. Because you work to get there, and you know that work may not have been fun, but after you get done, you get that sense of accomplishment and fulfillment because you did a hard thing. And it doesn't have to be complex either. It could be like Geometry Dash. Geometry Dash, you jump, pretty much, and that's it. There are like other movement modes that some levels make use of, but like the main thing is like you just jump. But you know, there's a whole the dude made a whole game out of that. And so it doesn't have to be a complex movement system. You can make it fun with just one button. Hell, in Geometry Dash you can't even move side to side, you scroll automatically. And like auto-scroller levels have historically been really bad, and like especially in like Mario games with the airship levels, they can get really boring or really hard depending on the scroll speed. And it's really hard to balance and make good. But Geometry Dash does it perfectly fine because it's synced to a song, and you know, you've got all these obstacles to try and avoid. And you can't ever fall behind the auto-scroll because your player just moves on their own. And so they've made a really fun game out of just one button, for the most part. So it doesn't have to be a complex movement system, it just has to serve your gameplay loop. One of the things I'd really love to see in one of these parkour games is a game that's a lot like Mirror's Edge, but a little bit more realistic on the movement, and like a little bit more in depth on like vaults. So like if I were to design it, if you did like a speed vault over this, it would preserve your speed perfectly, but if you did like a Kong vault, then it might not preserve as much speed, but it would also give you the opportunity to like springboard off of it, because your feet would be in the correct position to do so. And what would trigger that is basically like the timing at which you hit the vault button. I don't think that would kind of serve the gameplay of this game because it's more about style, but I think it could work in a parkour game, in a new one. And of course, I hope this isn't like the last parkour game that ever gets made, but I wouldn't be too sad if it was, because this game's pretty sweet. And I hope that updates it gets over time, adds more moves, more customization, everything like that. If you ever need like a parkour game where you can just kind of chill out and move around, do time trials, do trick trials maybe, definitely give this one a shot. As you can see right here, all the moves look really nice. Chaining the other moves can feel really satisfying. Usually bailing is just kind of your own fault, which is kind of the best principle of game design, is to make it so that failure is always the player's fault. So I think this game does a good job of that for the most part. I mean, there's a few bugs, a few frame rate glitches, but that's more of a product of it being an early access game than anything else. So hopefully a lot of those things will get fixed by the time it goes out of early access. And you can let this game be a lesson to you if you are an up-and-coming game developer. If you ever want to start creating a game, one person made this. There's no reason you can't make something. I'm trying to make stuff right now. And it's a learning process for sure. It'll take you a long time to learn how to do it. Making games is not easy. But video games aren't always art, but they definitely can be. They definitely very much can be. So go out and create something. Doesn't have to be good at first. Just has to be something. Progress of any kind. Because if one guy can make this, you certainly can make something cool too. It doesn't take necessarily a whole team to make something. It just takes one guy and, you know, a vision. Something to make.